Well, we're joined now by Brigadier General John Tykert, who is a former Assistant Deputy Undersecretary for the US Air Force and a former combat pilot. He joins us from Washington, D.C. General Tykert, thank you very much indeed for your time, sir. Operation Epic Fury is now in day 3. Let me just start by asking you, what was your initial reaction when you heard that military engagement between the United States, Israel, and Iran had begun?
Tom, I wasn't surprised with that we started it, but I was most surprised by when it started. I think the fact that it started during the day on Saturday morning Tehran time provided all of us a lot of surprise, and it provided an opportunity to decapitate the leadership team in Iran and destroy their ability to command and control their forces. And I think thus far they have been fighting deaf, dumb, and blind largely because of the surprise that came from that Saturday morning strike.
Okay, and what are we looking at here, in your opinion? In your, you've got a long military experience. Are we looking at the start of a weeks-long campaign, or do you think it'll be quicker than that?
Tom, I think it's going to be quicker than that, but I think you need to break down what we're doing by military objectives, or the ability to completely stop the Iranian regime from having power projection capability to harm U.S. interests or its neighbors in the region, and then the political objectives, which may or may not be ultimate regime change. And we're not quite sure from the White House if that's the ultimate objective, but I do know that the Secretary of War and the chairman made very clear that the military objective is to destroy the ability of the regime in Iran to project power and do harm to American interests and our allies and partners in the region.
Right. We're probably reading from the same song sheet, but the way I've had it broken down to me is that the stated aim is to destroy Iran's missiles, its navy, and its security infrastructure. And I want to ask you this: is all of that achievable only from the air?
Tom, I think largely it is. And there are 3 primary target sets right now that are being prosecuted by aircraft from the air and surface-to-surface strikes and ship-to-surface strikes. That one of those is the command and control facilities, the ability to manage from the Iranian perspective any of its military forces, and we're continuing to revisit those types of targets. Number 2, especially and primarily, the ballistic missile fleet. That Iran started this war with about 1,000 ballistic missiles. We don't strike the individual missiles, but we strike the launchers and the warehouses and the production facilities. And then number 3, I think we're starting to shift into servicing more targets that are related to internal security. And the reason we are doing that is to provide the Iranian people the opportunity, the opposition there, to rise up as the president has challenged them to do. But I think the ballistic missile fleet and the command and control sites are the 2 primary ways that you eliminate, in the max extent possible, the ability of the regime to project power.
Right, and you think this can be done, just to press you on this point, without boots on the ground?
I think it is our absolute intent and is possible to shred the ability of Iran to defend itself and then ultimately to project power. And maybe something to amplify here, Tom, is the fact that Israel started a campaign last summer during those 12 days to shred the Iranian air defenses. We're revisiting some of those defenses, but once they are gone, then it provides a permissive environment for the United States and our allies and partners to regularly go after target sets across the country that could project power. And I think now that we have this widespread air superiority or supremacy, then you're going to start to see more aggressive activity, maybe being launched from some of our Gulf partners, to strike all of the targets that allow Iran to project power.
We heard from General Dan Kane that more forces are heading out to the region. Can we assume, therefore, there is going to be a broader U.S. buildup in the region?
I think the general gist of what General Kane said was that we are posturing our forces not just to maximize our ability to achieve short-term objectives, but to have the sustainability for forces to continue to revisit military targets until we're convinced that power projection capabilities are gone from Iran. So I don't think it's any unique capability that is arriving in theater. I think it is a more massive ability to sustain an air campaign until, again, we're confident that our military objectives are complete.
General Teichert, just looking at what's happened these last 3 days, I mean, events have moved extremely quickly. Iran has been striking US bases across the region. It's also been striking some civilian targets across the Gulf region. What message do you think Tehran is trying to send out by doing this?
Tom, I think it's been a bit of an act of desperation by the regime, or what's left of it in Iran, that all of those allies and partners in the region in the Middle East were intending to sit this one out, that they weren't going to allow the U.S. to fly strike sorties from their countries. But now that Iran has continued to show a complete disregard for the well-being of the people in the Middle East, that now they are absolutely defending themselves. And I suspect that many of those allies and partners in the region are going to start to allow U.S. forces to strike Iranian targets from their soil when they wouldn't otherwise be doing so. And I think it's pretty clear that Iran is further isolating themselves and reminding the world, and especially the Middle East, that they have been at the root of the primary concerns or problems within the Middle East for the last 4.5 decades.
Just pivoting back to what we were talking about just a moment ago. I mean, we did just play a clip of Pete Hegseth, the US Defense Secretary, who obviously was paying tribute to the US Armed Forces who've died already. But he did seem to leave open this possibility of boots on the ground in Iran. So would you exclude it altogether?
Tom, I wouldn't, because you never want to tell your adversary what you're not going to do, because it makes their strategic calculus easier. I don't expect we're going to have widespread boots on the ground. There might be some special operators that are already there, but I don't think you want to simplify Iran's strategic calculus by taking something off the table. I think you want them to keep guessing so that they've got to defend not just against air targets, but against potential ground incursion also.
Okay, I want to pick up on what you were saying there about how, the Trump administration, the United States, was counting on, to some extent, arming opposition groups in Iran. And we have heard President Trump calling on the Iranian people to rise up against the existing leadership. I mean, have we seen any signs that that's happening? Would you expect to see that happening yet? Or do you think it's a case of wishful thinking?
Tom, I'm not sure if it's going to happen, but I think the president is making very clear that the political objective of ultimate regime change to large extent lies in the hands of the Iranian people. And I think that we, as we start to strike more internal security sites, are facilitating that uprising. I think probably the Starlink terminals that we covertly inserted about 6,000 of in the last several weeks are going to be used to coordinate between opposition forces and one another and U.S. forces so we can maximize our consolidated effort. But again, that political objective is largely in the hands of the Iranian people. I think we're facilitating it, but we need to see them take the action to overthrow the regime to ultimately achieve that political objective.
General Teichert, I just want to ask you, I mean, before it became apparent that this was the road the United States was going to go down, the Iranians carried out some joint drills in the region in conjunction with the Russians. Do you see the Russians, or indeed any other parties, coming to Iran's rescue, so to speak, in their hour of need?
Tom, I do not. That we did not see Russia or China support them during the 12-day war. And I think, again, they're going to be sitting this one out, number one, because Iran is not a trusted partner for them. But number two, I think that they're probably hoping as quickly as possible for oil to start flowing out of the Persian Gulf, because China in particular relies on that oil. And I think they would much rather see this end sooner rather than later so they can get back to normal business between the new regime in Iran, or whatever transpires there, and the ability to export oil through the Gulf.
And obviously, with Russia engaged with Ukraine militarily still, And Iran has been a trusted supplier of drones and missiles. I'm wondering how much of a setback it is likely to be seen as being by the Russians to see potentially a third ally in the space of 18 months after Syria, Venezuela, now Iran potentially falling.
Tom, I think that it is pretty telling, especially in the case of Syria, that frankly, Russia's largest friend in the region is no longer a friend and no longer a trusted ally. And Iran has always been a bit of a tenuous partner for Russia. There have been some mutual benefits, but I do think it's telling that back during the 12-day war, you did not see Iran engage on behalf of their friends in Iran. I can't expect that they will now, though I'm sure they are lamenting the fact that they are indeed losing another one of their partners in the world.
General, let's just talk about where we see things heading to from here. As we've been saying in this program, Hezbollah has, to some extent, joined in from Lebanon. Are you worried about this escalating into some sort of a multi-front war? And that was something the Iranians warned about from the get-go.
Tom, I think Iran would have loved to see a multi-front war back last summertime during the 12-day war, but their proxies did not engage. And in fact, now their relationship with those proxies is far less secure than it was even last summer. And so while there have been some rocket or missile strikes from Hezbollah into northern Israel, it's been fairly minor. Israel's taking care of it. And I think the proxies realize that their best interests are to not align with Iran because Iran is a failing regime that no longer can be trusted to support them.
Let's talk about this briefly from a US political perspective, and forgive me for asking this, and do feel free to move on if you don't want to engage in political conversation. But President Trump did not run this by Congress. 1 in 4 Americans support this operation. That's according to a couple of polls I've seen. There may be other polls. But how politically risky do you think this is for the Trump administration?
Tom, I want to go back to 2 prior modern-day American air wars. Number one was 1999 in the former Yugoslavia 78-day war, where President Clinton did not get congressional approval to strike or even to maintain that war. And then 2011 in Libya, a war that lasted 7 months, and President Obama never got an approval from Congress. And so I think it's very hypocritical for those on the other side of the aisle that are lamenting what's going on in Iran during the last 3 days to point out that he did not get congressional approval because it was 2 Democratic presidents that did not, for air wars that lasted 78 days and 7 months. Now, as far as being politically risky, the American public is very sensitive to losses amongst the American military personnel. We saw 4 deaths already confirmed. We saw 3 F-15E Strike Eagles in a friendly fire incident being lost. But I do think that overall, the dazzling success, at least at the operational level, achieving military objectives, is keeping the American people on board to support our 50,000 military members that are in the region. But I do think as this drags on, there may be concerns amongst the population that this is not in our interest. But as far as congressional approval goes, several months went by in those 2 other operations before we got congressional approval. In fact, it never came. And I just want to remind the people of that recent history.
Okay, thanks for that. And just lastly, I mean, where do you see things heading to from here? Are we looking at escalation? Are we looking at some sort of a stalemate? Are we looking at some negotiated off-ramps? Where do you see things heading?
Tom, I think there's 2 primary off-ramps. Number one would be when we accomplish those military objectives of diminishing the ability of the regime to project power. And that could be an opportunity for us to step aside and say, we achieved what we wanted to militarily. The people didn't achieve political objectives. That's on them. And back to the Iranian people to deal with the aftermath. That's one off-ramp. The second off-ramp is that we stay engaged as long as needed until we see the regime fall. And I'm curious to see as this plays out in the next week or so, once we get close to achieving military objectives, whether the president takes that off-ramp or continues on until we see something more significant with respect to regime change and political objectives.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Thank you so much, Brigadier General John Teichert. Thank you very much for your time, sir.